Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the ICDD Interview Series. It is my honor to introduce today's expert, Professor Dr. Eleonor Faur. Eleonor is a full professor at the National University of San Martin and a researcher at the Institute for Economic and Social Development in Argentina. Her experience combines social research, teaching, program management and design, as well as policy dialogue with different stakeholders. In 2018, she was a guest professor at the ICDD. Eleonor, thank you very much for taking your time to join us here and for this important discussion.
Thank you, Martín, and thank all ICDD staff, which were so nice when I've been there in Kassel. Thank you.
Yes, and we do hope that you can come again and that we will see you in person. But until then, I want to start off with a bit more introduction. So could you please tell us what are you up to these days in terms of your publications or research projects, and in particular those that are related to the decent work agenda?
Yes, well, my research area is on gender inequalities and public policies, especially focusing on the intersection of class, of socioeconomic inequalities and gender inequalities. I primarily work in two areas of such policies. The one is comprehensive sexuality education, and the second one, which is more related to decent work agenda, is on the political and social organization of care, which I was teaching in Kassel when I've been there as a visiting professor.
Thank you for that. Now, let's start the interview with what is in the focus of your working paper, and that is how care workers in Argentina organize the care of children under the age of 12. Namely, care occupations amount for a significant share of the female labor force. Among them, the two main categories are domestic workers and teachers. Can you please tell us what are the differences between these two main groups of workers when it comes to their working conditions, special benefits, as well as access to social rights and services?
Sure. Well, first, let me say that these are very feminized occupations, and they both work in a care occupation. However, teachers are among the workers whose regulatory framework is the most advanced in Argentina. It includes greater job stability, entry and promotion mechanisms, and training and tenure length play a key part. Teachers tend to be employed by highly regulated public sector institutions, the schools, of course, and in all, 87% of teachers are in stable employment and 70% education workers are formally employed. Regarding domestic service, this occupation is also regulated by a special regime, but their working conditions are quite poorer and more unprotected, as 77% of them are not registered in the social security system. So this situation means that they don't have access to critical social rights as health protection, coverage for occupation accidents and illness, maternity leave, paid vacations, sick leaves, and Christmas bonus. Only those who are registered can access all these social service, social security system. But fortunately in Argentina, we have public health, but this is not, I mean, it is absolutely a very unequal situation for these two groups of care workers. So this needs to be understood, as I say in the paper, within a framework of unequal power relations that are really grounded in their class inequalities, not only in gender inequalities.
Yes, so it is evident that these different layers of inequalities are present between teachers and domestic workers and between them and other groups of workers. And these include everything from monetary gains to parental leave to workers' rights, trade union representation, etc. But how do these asymmetries between these two groups of workers affect their practical childcare strategies?
Well, these conditions give teachers a series of comparative advantages, as you said. So on the one hand, many private schools subsidize tuition for the children of teachers they employ, either in part or in full. I mean, state schools, but also in private schools. So they have access, teachers have access for their children to schools from early age of their children. This is a primary care strategy for this population. However, in the case of domestic service, they don't have these facilities, so they just try to get a place in the schools, but not, I mean, the difference between the population that can join schools from an early age are very different. So this is one of the difference between their care strategies. There also, well, I'm sorry, I'm maybe going forward in another question, so I leave here and then
No, that is quite fine. Actually, I wanted to ask you more about this access to state-run schools, kindergartens, and community services, which play a fundamental role in improving participation in the labor market, among other things. So, to what extent do these institutions and providers meet the needs of different care workers?
Yes, well, when we look at the age of from 5 to 12 years old, where education is compulsory in Argentina, we have very, I mean, large participation of children in these schools. The problem is when we look from children under 4 years old, where their education is not compulsory. So what we find is deep disparities among the availability of education and care services. And for instance, only 4 out of every 10 children of care workers under the age of 4 attend an educational or care establishment. However, these rates are over twice as high among teachers' children than that among domestic workers' children. That is, the children from teachers participate in this primary, I mean, preschool education. 52% of their children attend a public, an institution, public or private, versus 23% of children from domestic workers. So this is, I mean, double the participation. In addition, what we found is that 15% of teachers employ a domestic worker or a nanny in their homes. So this is a very, I mean, typical strategy in middle-class households in Argentina and other Latin American countries. Of course, this is not the situation when there is a household of a domestic service worker herself, where only 6% of domestic workers can employ another female worker to take care of their own children. So this is very unequal or this heterogeneous care strategy among these 2 groups of care workers.
Yes, you paint a picture of almost extreme inequality, and I'm wondering to what can we attribute these inequalities? It seems that one part of it is social and economic status, but also are there some other elements at play, such as the fact that maybe some of them participate in informal sector, some, of course, like teachers are in formal sector, which could actually impact their negotiating power and status within the society and economy?
Well, what was interesting when I was analyzing all this situation is that, of course, I mean, the socioeconomic inequalities are reflected in institutional inequalities. I mean, they are like back and forth. Now, institutional inequalities such as better regulations for teachers, more access to schools, because one of the priority criteria for access is working in a school. I mean, all these, and of course, what you mentioned is the trade union participation. Teachers had a very historic and very active trade unions, and most of the teachers are linked to a trade union. In contrast, domestic workers, only 2% of domestic workers are affiliated to a trade union. So also the environmental conditions in which both these groups participate in the labor market affect absolutely their working conditions. Teachers work in a highly regulated institutions, as I've said, but domestic workers work in a private home where conditions are negotiated hand by hand. So all the power relations within this situation of labor, of course, affects their working conditions, their access to social rights, their salary, and all that condition. So what I try to share, to highlight in the paper is the way in which care strategies are deeply linked to social rights, to working conditions of these two sectors. So gender inequalities are similar for both groups. So when we look at household labor, of course, both groups of mothers are the primary care providers of their children. This is one inequality, I mean, social inequality, very anachronic, I would say, but extended in all over the world still. But when we look at the socioeconomic conditions, we see that the mechanisms, public mechanisms, they do not only, they cannot, how do you say this? They cannot, the public mechanism, the institutional mechanism cannot compensate inequalities in socioeconomic layers of inequality, but instead of that, they deep on this inequality. So this is the critical situation for, in this case, domestic workers. Having said that, I must say that teachers are not the privilege here in Argentina. I mean, it's middle class or includes lower middle class. I mean, we are not speaking about privileged population. We are speaking about workers, formal workers, contrasting with poor female workers who doesn't have access to social rights.
What can be done on part of the state to at least remedy this situation to an extent? I guess what would be your suggestions for policies that can enhance access to educational and care services for children, and also reduce these stark inequalities between different social groups, which you just elaborated on?
Yes, sure. Well, I think public policies here are critical, are very, very important, and they have to be elaborated and implemented with a universal rights approach. So when we speak about access to school and kindergartens and creches, we have public policies need to provide public schools for the youngest children. So if we just say that 5 years old are compulsory education and all what is under 4 remains as remains uncompulsory, what begins to operate is that market is going to have the lead in providing these services. So the most the commodification of services are spread, the more class inequalities arise. So one particular important policy is to deliver universal provision of schools and kindergartens for all children in our country. The other situation is job security. I mean, it's incredible that here in Argentina, we have almost 50% of female labor force in an unregistered status. So when we don't have decent work for women, of course, we don't have decent care or social access to security systems. So this is absolutely critical, especially in always, but now that we are facing an overlap of crisis, socioeconomic crisis, health crisis. I mean, this Latin America was really affected by pandemic crisis. So states cannot be like blinded in the situation of the undecent conditions that workers have. And this affects particularly to women in Argentina and all Latin America. So, and there's another interesting situation that nowadays in Latin America, some care system, integrated or comprehensive care systems are trying to be defined and designed as a political policy, as a public policy that can, in a way, articulate different provisions and to guarantee good care access. So nowadays we have a law presented at the parliament by the president, trying to design a care system. So we are really enthusiastic about the possibility to be that this law can be passed in the next months, but we have to work for that.
Of course. And that brings me to a point, because you just mentioned that there is something positive on the horizon. Do you see some other developments or trends? Maybe it's a movement, maybe it's a person or event that inspires you and gives you hope that a better future for domestic workers and teachers in Argentina is a realistic proposal?
Well, what makes me very optimistic is that feminist movement actually is very active nowadays in Argentina. Since like 7 years, it was like a spread, very interesting, with many groups going to the streets and claiming for rights. And when first it was violent against women, the policies that they were claiming for good policies of violence against women, then for abortion rights. And nowadays, what I see is that more and more feminists and women and people in general are claiming for care rights. So this is very important because, I mean, as we know, political agenda are driven by the social mobilizations. And I hope that this is coming to give us some good horizon. Still, we have a lot of work to do, but more and more people are getting consciousness about the importance of care and care work and the social organization of care. They are claiming for the redistribution of care. It's absolutely anachronic to remain considering that care is a feminine responsibility. It's a responsibility for all of us. We all have the possibility, the capacity to care for others and to care for ourselves and to care for the planet, actually. So we have to, I think there can be a strong movement if we can think about the possibility of working towards the care society, to try to to work together for the care of the planet, the care of people, and the self-care as well, and to have rights that can absolutely cover our possibility, our time, the time devoted to care. So we also have to think about reframing the time developed to working, to labor time and labor conditions. So I think we can be optimistic, but our optimism is linked to the social mobilization that can we drive for a social change about this, on this issue.
I'm glad that we managed to end on a positive note, but also managed to remind everyone that this optimism is indeed rooted in very real struggles of people in street, people in homes, wherever they are, whether they are working or fighting for their rights. So I want to thank you once again for taking your time, and this was a really necessary discussion.